All right, so for this example, we'll draw some legs kind of coming towards camera just a little bit. And so I'll start with a basic idea of the leg. And again, I'm going to show you other techniques for showing the bends of the leg, the rhythms. So this is one that I like to use, and I use this on arms and legs. And again, I'll show you these in more detail. But we're gonna have this coming out towards us, the foot coming out at a bit of an angle and meeting to the ground plane. And the other leg back here and kind of getting a little bit, maybe a little bit hidden by this leg, or at least down to the side. So again, this is almost like a sense of gesture, but it's really, I call this more of a rhythm of the way that the anatomy goes. So I'll jump a lot of times right into doing these. So for legs, it's an outward bend if we're looking straight onto the leg, up and then around the side, something like that. If you're looking at the side of the leg, it's more like this. Again, I'm explaining these in more detail because they're a little bit tricky by themselves. And then the arm is actually, it's almost like the side of the deltoid, up, down the front of the bicep, up, down the length of the forearm. And I use that one a lot. I use that even more. It's just very helpful for defining a quick representation of the arm. So like I said, when we get into talking more about the rhythms of the body, I'll show you those because they're very helpful. It's just like the S hook of the leg. It's also helpful because you'll see when we fill this leg in, we can check the work with it. So just like this, we've got a starting point for the leg. Now we want to drop in our cylinders. Now I want this leg to come out towards us. So I'm going to draw a cylinder where we would see the opening of the bottom plane of that cylinder, open the face that's kind of sliced off right there. Circle for the knee, even though the knee's not circular obviously, but we'll just put that in as a placeholder. And then another cylinder. And remember what I said about getting the bend of the leg in there. And I'm just going to jump right into the inner portion of the leg, which I believe that's referred to as the medial side. It's going to have that little bit of a diamond in there. And then this actually would be, again, an open face. So you can kind of shadow this to show that you are seeing the bottom open face of that. Remember, the opposite of that would be, because it's kind of confusing to look at, if you just put an oval here, you could say, well, this is actually a leg going away from our view, and this is the back edge behind it. Okay, so there's a couple ways to look at that, so that's why I like to shade them differently. So for me, now this means it's coming out towards us. In fact, one of the areas that makes it confusing is right here. This would have to be more like this. Even though, again, we know the knee is not just a ball, and it's not really going to get covered like that. But again, we're at this point, we're really trying to just convey a sense of depth and get this working. And then as far as the foot, the inside ankle is higher, outside ankle is lower, especially at this angle. As the foot raises up towards us, I would imagine this gets more noticeable. But just keep in mind there is that tilt there. We'll talk more about that as we go into the rhythms again. And then the foot, we're just going to taper that outward and then round down the bottom of the foot a little bit. Round that over, something like that. We're not going to get into all the toes and everything right now, but we just want to get the legs working. So just like that, we've got the leg coming out towards us. Now back here, we have to figure out the orientation of the other leg. Now, one thing to keep in mind is when the leg comes out towards us, you see this noticeable curve at the top, okay? And that helps us to realize this form is coming out towards us. The other leg is going to take more of a downward bend. This same area is now going to be a downward bend. You'll see this really evidently in the clothing and the way that the wrinkles occur, okay? So that's just something to think about. But you're even going to represent that with your primitive forms because it kind of gets all that going. So now we bring this cylinder down. Bring it pretty close, sometimes even meeting, depending on the character. You know, if they have thicker legs, a lot of times this area right here will fill in quicker, right? So if they're thinner, there might be a little bit more separation to the legs. If they're heavier, they're gonna their legs are gonna come together more. We'll talk about fat deposits as well, because that's another thing that you have to keep in mind when constructing these different characters. And then a downward view of the knee. So again, if you were to see through this, the opening to this cylinder would be like that, but we don't want that. We want just the downward view of the knee somewhere in here. Use this as a placeholder. The bottom portion of the leg, calf area, and we'll have this recede back. And I think I'm just going to have that get covered, and then we'll probably just see the other foot back here. Something like that. So almost like, you know, not a straight on sprint, but more like a jog, light run, something like that. And so now we can get rid of some of these construction lines because they're a bit confusing now that we have these primitive forms in place. And again, we can use our wrapping lines, or 3D perspective lines in a sense. I think that's another way to look at them. You can do as many of those as you like. I really just like a nice center line, and then a center overall to the height of the segment of the leg. Same thing with the foot. You can bring that center line right out. I also like to get a little plane change right here, because you're going to have the, you know, either the shoe or the toes. You're going to see a little bit of that. And again, center line, center line. Now this gets a little confusing, because even though I'm putting an oval in each one of these areas, I'm looking at these differently. So what I can do is I can darken the front edge of this oval and the front edge of this oval. And hopefully that gives you a better idea. I could even darken the part where it crosses the front. Hopefully it gives you a better idea and representation of the fact that these are oriented differently, right? That's the goal of this illustration. So I don't want to confuse you, or you know, you don't want to confuse yourself either by putting in unnecessary reference points. So again, a little bit darker on the front, maybe darken the cross section. And that should give you a better idea of this being the front, and this oval on this leg being up, and the other one facing down. Center line to the foot. And it feels like it's a little slanted. There's probably going to be a little bit of lean. I'm actually going to just pull that over, but because another thing we need to talk about is balance. We'll get into that with gesture and with rhythms, but also balance of the body, distribution of weight. There's so many things to cover, but again, that's why this is such a complex topic, but it's so worth it. It's so worth spending all this time developing these ideas and then getting this under control. And you got to remember too, these right here are great reference points. You can save these and you can draw any type of character over this. For a while there, and I need to get back to it, I would take these diagrams that I would create and I would post them around my art table so that I had different poses at any given time ready to go. And you'd be amazed, even if it's not the pose you need at that very moment, something about looking at them in that way alleviates other poses from different angles. You know, you just get better and better at turning this in your mind. And so yeah, it's great for the visual library. Again, so we'll stop here, head over to the next lesson and continue on. So with that, let's move forward.